But anyway, it excited me. Might not y'all, but I'm kind of a Bible nerd sometimes, so it kind of excited me. But I kind of want to go back and look at the Gospel of John, and there's reasons, I guess. I thought, where I want to go after that, and what do I want to do, um, but the more I've been studying John's Gospel the last few months, I really have, it's really broadened kind of, I guess, the scope of what I see overall in this gospel and the depth of it and the way that he parallels it to a lot of things that have to do with creation really astound me. And I think I've never really thought about it that way because I guess I never really thought about the bigger picture. But then we did that stuff in Genesis. I started looking at that, and then going back into John. John's different, right? Way different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We call them the synoptics, right? Synoptics. What single point of view is what that means. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are what we call synoptic gospels, singular point of view. And when you get into Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you get into the life of Jesus. That's true. There's a lot of things they talk about that John really doesn't spend any time on. John only has, and I guess this is debatable, but there's really only 7 miracles in John. And John really doesn't use the word miracle. John uses the word sign. Now, you could say 8 if you talk about John chapter 20 and the fish for breakfast, but basically we say there's 7 miracles, 7 signs in John, in the book of John, which is interesting because 7 is a significant number, right? 7 is a significant number. You don't have any parables in John's gospel. John didn't. Now there's one kind of could maybe say that, but basically there is no parables in the Gospel of John. Doesn't recount the parables of Jesus. So that's not something we see in John's Gospels. John is late, really late. In the chronological sequence of when books of the Bible were written, John is very, very late, very late. So where you get, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are in the 60s, probably in the 60s, late 60s. John's more like in the 90s AD. So he's a lot later than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. A lot of things, we're at Christmas time, right? And we all think about that, birth of Jesus. But we really only get that in Matthew and Luke. Mark doesn't tell us anything about it. John certainly doesn't tell us anything about it. John doesn't even start there. John goes right basically into Jesus' ministry. I mean, he doesn't spend any time on genealogies. He doesn't spend any time on the birth. He doesn't spend a lot of time on John the Baptist. He does some, not a lot. John doesn't spend much time on that at all, and John moves quickly to the end. It's in John where we get our 3.5-year ministry of Jesus. John's the one who we see the Passovers in that. That's how we start dating how long Jesus' ministry was. All that comes out of John's gospel. John starts the gospel the same way that Genesis starts. And we use translation, right? We use an English translation of the Greek text because none of us in here, I don't think, read Greek. Don't ask me to read it. I can show you a few words. So we use an English translation, right? Well, when Jesus was on the earth in the first century and before the first century even, most people didn't read Hebrew. And the Old Testament, as we know, is predominantly a Hebrew text, right? So they had a translation of that Bible at the time of Jesus, a Greek translation of the Hebrew, right? So that was called the Septuagint. So if you look at the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew, and you look at the Greek of John 1:1, in the beginning is the same word. In the beginning starts exactly the same as Genesis. In the beginning, God created, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless void, and the Spirit of God moved across the surface of the deep, right? Genesis 1:1. John, the Gospel of John, in John 1:1, it says what? It says, in the beginning, if I can make my thing move, in the beginning was the Word, right? Logos is that word in the Greek. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth formless void, and the Spirit of God moved across the surface of the deep. And God what? In Genesis. And God spoke. God said. God said. Remember that? Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, right? Genesis 1:1. Very first book, very first chapter of the Bible. Genesis. In the beginning, God created. Elohim. In the beginning, let me get there. And God spoke. God said. God said, right? Genesis 1:3. Then God said, let there be light. God spoke, didn't he? Everything that God did in Genesis, he spoke it into existence, didn't he? It never says God manipulated, God took it and made it, we would like that, we would love that if the Bible said this is how God did it, right? But it doesn't ever say that, right? And then John says the very same wordage, very same words in the Greek, in the beginning was what? Was the Word. How did God create? God did what? God spoke. God spoke it, right? He spoke it into existence. So when John, when he's looking at this, what's he looking at? What's John thinking in John's head when he sits down to write John, the Gospel of John, and he sits down and he writes those words, in the beginning was the Word. What was John thinking about when he was writing that Gospel? He's thinking about Genesis 1. He's thinking about the beginning, in the beginning. Why? Why is that so important? Why is it so important that John wants to get us all the way back to Genesis 1? Why does John want to do that with us? Why is that important? What point? What's the point? What's the point of John? He was there, right? He was there, right? He existed. He existed in the beginning of time. Jesus existed when God spoke. In the beginning was what? Word, right? In the beginning was Word. Look at Genesis 1. What does it say? In the beginning, right? God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, right? It talks about emptiness, but it says, and the Spirit of God moved across the surface of the deep. Right? So when you see Genesis 1, in the beginning God, Elohim, spoke Christ, right? And then it was formless and void, and the Spirit of God moved across the surface of the deep. Where's the first place we see the three personalities of God? In the beginning, Genesis, right? You say, oh, that didn't come along till the New Testament, Rex. It was there all along. It was there the whole time. It was in Genesis 1. The three personalities of the Godhead existed in Genesis 1 through 3. You understand what I'm saying? Even the word for God in Genesis is Elohim. Elohim. That's a plural intensive word for God. It was there. And so John says, listen, Jesus was there. Jesus was in the beginning. Jesus existed from the beginning, from the creation of the world. The Bible says that Jesus Christ was slain from the what? Foundation of the world. Right? What does that mean to you? It means when God spoke in Genesis, Jesus Christ hung on a cross. That was done. That was already done. He was slain from the foundation of the earth. John says, so this is not to my epiphany yet, but I'm working there. So this sets this tremendous stage for John's gospel. He sets it at the beginning of the gospel. And if we really start to look, and we will at John, we're going to see how he ties this together. And you and I, as New Testament Christians, especially most of my life, when I never really looked at the Old Testament at all, which is the majority of my life, you and I, as New Testament Christians, we don't make the connection because we're not geared that way. We're not thinking like that. We're thinking Jesus Christ was what? Born in Bethlehem. When did Jesus, if you ask most people in the world, when did Jesus Christ come into existence? What do you think that most people would say? Bethlehem, right? Yeah. Philippians, right? He emptied himself, taking on the form of a human, right? Well, I think when Jesus was 12 in the temple and he was speaking and they were amazed at what he was saying, I mean, you know, there definitely has to be something to that, right? More than just, I'm a smart guy, you know? Yeah. Right. Yeah, for sure. John, matter of fact, it's John's gospel who tells us that Jesus had the Spirit without measure. You know, he had the Spirit unmeasurably, you know. But it's this huge thing. And so when we think about it and back up a little bit, we think about this, right? And you really put John's gospel out on the table and you really look at it, and I'm going to try to help you see some of this. It's just, it's awe-inspiring how he makes this work, you know. It's just awe-inspiring. But anyway, so he was in the beginning. What does that make him? What does that make Christ? Makes him God. Would you agree with that statement? Because God is what? If we had to say, okay, I want to define God, we say God has three attributes. Am I right? We say that he's all, right? He's all seeing, right? He's all knowing, he's all present, right? Divine knowledge, right? All knowledge, right? All present, right? That's what we say about, that's the difference. That's the difference between God and an angel. Angels aren't all present, omnipresent we call that, right? Or, right? They're not omniscient, right? They don't have all knowledge, right? So they're not all powerful, right? Well, those are our things we use to describe God. But Jesus fits every one of those characteristics. Jesus fits every one of those characteristics. So John says that all things are here came through Christ, and that without Christ, nothing came into being. That Jesus was so intricately involved in creation that without Jesus in creation, nothing would be created, nothing would happen. Jesus is that intrinsically involved with creation. This beginning of John is just, it's awe-inspiring because it speaks of the divinity of Christ. Why is it so important, do you think? Why did John want us? Because so many things in John's Gospels, and I mean, we're going to see this over and over and over as we go through this. So many things in John's Gospel are about a physical, divine being. You know, a lot of people want to say, oh, well, Christ is divine. He's only divine, right? He's only divine. Some people, like you say, Sam, some people want to say, well, he's only human, only flesh, right? Only flesh, right? What John wants us to see is that he can be both of those things in one person. He can be divine and yet he can be flesh. A lot of people in John's day, and Paul's day, and John's day, first century Christians, a lot of people early in Christianity, I'll word this right in a minute, and a lot of people still, they believe that Jesus Christ is more a liberator than a savior. They believe it's a thing called dualism, okay? Some people believe, and in the first century, these people believed, and we called them Gnostics, and I'm sure you've heard me mention that word. And the word Gnostic simply means knowledge. And Gnostics exist to this day. There's Gnostics in the world today. You can read books they write. Elaine Pangle's book, Gospel of Thomas, is a really big Gnostic book. They believe that you can, by divine knowledge, you can like attain into like a higher dimension. You can like see into a higher dimension. They believe that dualists believe that Jesus Christ was flesh, that the Holy Spirit came on him, and at his crucifixion, the Holy Spirit departed from him and went back to God. They see that Jesus is only divine, not as human, not as flesh. That's why only in John's Gospel do we get the story of doubting Thomas. We don't get that in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. What's so important about the story of doubting, we call it doubting Thomas. What's so important about the story of Thomas? Jesus said what? Reach out and what? Touch me. Reach out and touch me. That's a big thing. If you read 1 John, John says this, Jesus that we've seen, that we've held, that we've touched. Big thing. Sets the stage. So what John's trying to prove in his gospel is that Jesus is flesh and blood, but he's divine, he's God. That's a big thing. We still struggle with that. That's a hard thing to prove, but yet that's what John wants to prove. Now this was my epiphany. I'm going to try to work you through this a little bit. So, I found this really interesting. And I have never looked at this before in my entire life until this week. So I found this very, very interesting. And it was one of them kind of eureka deals, you know, like I was Eureka, you know. I really thought it was neat. Anyway, so I'm going to share it with you. So I never had pulled this out of John before, but it's interesting how John, so John starts, okay, so the Gospel of John, it moves fairly fast. And it moves quickly in John 2 to the first miracle, the first sign of John's Gospel, right? And you know what that is? First miracle, right? We call it Jesus' first miracle, first sign. Water into wine, right? John chapter 2. That's the first sign of John, is John chapter 2, turning water into wine. And I think that's significant too, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. So you start looking at John, and in John 1:19, this is the beginning, okay? This is like, okay, this is our start point. This is the testimony of John when the Jews sent him high priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who are you? So I want to go to the text for a minute. I want to go to this text. So John starts with that very big opening statement. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and nothing was made that was not made through him, and this huge divine statement of Jesus. And then he quickly moves into John. There came a man sent from God whose name was John. He's a witness, testified the light. He's not the light. There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightened every man. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world would not know him. So this ties a lot of stuff together that he started with. Number one, the light. The light. John's big on light. Jesus is the light of the world, light sent into the darkness. And then he talks about, once again, in 9, he gets back into this. The world was made through him, and the world did not know him. The world was made through him. So we're back into that thought process. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. Who were those? The Jews. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those that believe in his name, who are born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So what's he saying? So they were born, how are they born of God? John, what happens in John 3? What happens in John chapter 3? The guy who comes to see him? Nicodemus. What's he tell Nicodemus? Unless you're born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God, right? This is all tying together. I'm telling you, it's fascinating how this all works. So he goes into that, and we'll probably back up to this in a minute, but I'm trying to get down. I want to kind of show you this before we get out of time. So we're going to have to back up into this next week, but the Word, well, it'll be a week after next, but the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory. So the Word, who's divine, the Word that was creation, the Word became flesh, Christ, and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory as the only begotten. John testified about him and cried out, saying, "This is he whom I said, who comes to me as a higher rank, and cannot go before me." And I want to jump down to 19 because I want to jump down right before 19. So this is this intro. This is John's intro, right? John's intro down to 19. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, which is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. And we're going to back up into this. I'm not going to just rush through this. I'm going to back up, but I want you to see. So we get through this John intro, right? This big intro. We go into this big intro of John, and then it says what? In 1:19, this is testimony of John. So this is our start. That's what I'm trying to. This is what I'm trying to show you. I'm still working on this a little in my brain, so kind of bear with me. So this is the start. Then in 1:29, so 1:19 is the start. Well, with that, y'all with me on that? Then it says in 29, the next day he saw Jesus coming to him. See, I never saw that in John before, how he goes through these days. In John 1:19, he says the next day he saw Jesus coming to him. In John 1:35, it says again the next day John was standing with two of his disciples. How many days are we at? 2 days, right? 2 days. And then in 1:43, it says the next day he purposed to go into Galilee, and he found Philip, and Jesus said to him, "Follow me." 3 days, right? So what do you got here? So we start in 19, that's a day. Then in 29, it's the next day. Then in 35, it's the next day. Then in 43, it's the next day. 4 days, right? Okay, then in 43, what happens? So we get to 143. Hold on, I can show you. We get to 143, and what's going to happen? Hold on, back up. Okay, so 143, that's the next day. He purposed to do what? Okay, so where's he at? So we talked about John the Baptist, right? Remember? And then we're doing this, the day. He's not in Galilee, right? So where would he be probably? Probably be in Judea, right? If he's not in Galilee, right? And then it says the next day he purposed to go into Galilee, and he found Philip and said, "Follow me." And Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter, and found Nathanael. Okay, so this is not going to matter to us right now. So then what happens? So we go down to chapter 2. And then it says on the third day. Now I'm going to back up. So let's back up. Let's see if this makes any sense. I'm working hard here. I'm paddling hard. Don't the dinghy's moving, but I'm paddling hard here today. So let's go back. So it's the beginning, 19, that's a day, 29, second day, 35 is third day, 43 is fourth day. We go to Galilee, and then how many days? 3, right? So how many is that? 7. See, I don't think that's an accident. Yeah, but I know, and I know that's confusing, and I really had to look at this because I've run this in my head a million different directions, you know. So it's on the third day when he gets to Galilee. So we stop at 43, and then we go to Galilee, and then 3 days there's a wedding. And I I never saw that before. You know, and I mean, that might not mean much to you. Maybe it doesn't mean anything to anybody here, but I thought, that is not an accident, you know? Because 7 days, 7 miracles. I mean, we're going to go to all these sevens. You know, what's the deal about 7? Yeah, it's perfection, right? So he starts out with creation, right? He says, God is creator. Jesus is creator. Jesus is divine. Jesus was God. How many days of creation? 7 days, right? Well, rested on the 7th. 6 days, rested on the 7th, right? And so on the 7th day, Jesus winds up in Cana of Galilee, and what does he do? Turns water into wine. Right, and if you look at John 2, let me get up here. I want you to see something right here. Hold on a minute. I think I did this. Hang on. Let me back up. Did I do this? I did this. Okay. This is the other thing. This ties it together. Because the translation, our translations aren't real good in 2:11. And so I looked this up in the Greek, right? And it takes me a long time to do things in the Greek, like forever. But I'm looking this up in the Greek, and I'm trying to get this down. So finally, I have to go find this guy, right? And I have to, listen to what he has to say, because I can't get it. I'm not that good. So the right way this should read, and this is NET. This is the closest translation I could find to the Greek. And I hardly ever use NET. So, and Jesus, okay, so it says, Jesus did this as the first of his miraculous signs. And you say, well, Rex, why does that matter? So if you go to New American Standard in John 2:11, New American Standard, which is the way I've always read this, John 2:11, it says, this beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. That's what we've always read, right? And that kind of, you go, well, that's right. You know, this is the first sign. This is the beginning of the sign. This is, this is when it started. The problem is, this is better. This isn't perfect. But you got to look at 11. It says, Jesus did this. In other words, how do I say this and make it right? It wasn't, when we look at the miracle of the turning the water into wine in Galilee, we see Jesus' mom coming to him, and he says, do what you say, and he's like, it's not my time. We've all know this story, right? It's not my time, but I'm going to do it anyway because mom's asking me, and, mom's pushy and bossy, and I need to do it. And we kind of look at it that way. But in the text, in the original, in the language, Jesus did this. In other words, I don't know how, I'm not saying this the way I want to say it. I don't know if I know how to say it. It was a purposeful act of Jesus' first miracle. It didn't just occur. It didn't just happen. It didn't just come on him. He did this. He purposefully did it, right? And when you think about it, what's the first miracle? We're going to turn the water into wine. What? Man, John 6, right? John 6. Jesus said, unless you drink my blood and eat my flesh, you have no part in me, right? He instituted the Lord's Supper in John's Gospel, right? Take this, eat, take this, this is my body, this is my blood. There's no accident here. And see, I think when you see it in John, and it's funny in NET, because it said Jesus this as his miraculous sign, but the Greek there is sign. He did this as a sign. This wasn't a charlatan act. This wasn't just something to say, oh, look what Jesus can do. There was a reason he turned water to wine. There was a reason he did that. It was a purposeful, deliberate act that Jesus did as divine, as the Son of God. Jesus did this act. And I've never looked at that miracle that way in my entire life. To me, the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine my entire life has almost been an accident. It's almost been like, why did he do it? Why doesn't it make any sense? That's a stupid miracle. I shouldn't say that, but that's kind of what I thought. It's a stupid miracle, right? I mean, he's not healing anybody. He's not making anybody better. He's not raising a dead person. But what are Jesus' miracles about? Feeding people, right, that are hungry, right? Making lame people walk that can't walk. Making people see that can't see. Raising the dead, right? Making people that can't hear. Turning water into wine? I mean, what's the big thing? What's that showing? What's it a sign of? Well, it's a sign because Jesus, by his miraculous power, made that the first sign that he ever performed on the earth. And he did that because he's divine and he's the Son of God. And he did it because he decided to do it. He made it happen. He did it. There wasn't no accident here. It wasn't no thing. He did this. And it was no accident that he performed a miracle to turn water into wine. Even though that didn't save anybody's life or heal anybody or do anything else, there's a reason he did that. And when you start looking past this miracle, start looking at John's gospel, start looking at the things Jesus said, which we'll do in John's gospel, it ties all this stuff together because he was fixated on this idea of Jesus being flesh, Jesus' blood being represented by the wine and the communion, Jesus' transformative power, the transformative power of Jesus Christ, right? Where's the power at? Where's the power? It's in the blood, right? Power's in the blood. We sing that song, right? What's the representation of blood in the New Testament? Wine, right? This was not an accident. He not only did it, he did a lot of it, and it was the best ever, right? There was more than they could drink, right? How much blood does Jesus Christ have to save the world? Enough? More than enough, right? And it's the best, isn't it? It's the perfect best ever. What was that wine? It was the best. Remember? Isn't that what they said? This is the best. Why do you save this to the last? You serve the cheap stuff first. Why did you serve the best stuff last? And when they were done, did they have a lot left? Absolutely. Jesus Christ was the perfect blood at the last, right? And there was plenty of it to go around. I kind of get chill bumps over this. I tell you, when I went going through this and trying to finish this up last night, and maybe I haven't done a good job of presenting this to you. I don't know. I don't know if it means anything to you at all. But when I went through this, I was like, I have never in my life read John 1 like this, ever. Ever. And it just like opened up. And then the more I started doing this, the more it just started cascading into the rest of John's Gospels. 7 miracles, the miracles that were done, the things John said, John chapter 6, Nicodemus, John chapter 3, right? Woman at the well, John 4, what did he say? Take this water, this living water, you'll never thirst again, right? Was it an accident that Jesus turned water into wine in John chapter 2? No, not even a little bit. It wasn't even a little bit. It was the perfect first sign of Jesus Christ. I'm coming at the last. I'm better than anything before me. There's plenty of it. Right? It was absolutely miraculous. And it was a sign of who Jesus Christ was. Anyway, maybe this didn't mean nothing to you tonight. I was just like, wow. It's like I couldn't wait to tell you. So I hope you like it. Because I was like, wow, this is neat. So thanks for your time.